Good day. My name is Evgeny Mishkov. In my last video I talked about the events which helped me realize that there is much more to our world than is commonly known. I would often read about UFOs, cosmos, and so-called paranormal occurrences in my search for the meaning of life and existence. I did find the answers to my questions when I was 20 years old. 2 years had passed since I learned about Snezhko Roman Alexeyevich's method of getting rid of stupor, or stuttering in modern medicine. While some problems in my life were gone thanks to my new knowledge as well as meditation, the other problems appeared. Loneliness, stress caused by me going bald, and from the new scar on my lip, and also cardiorespiratory issues, which were caused by a seemingly absurd reason. All that made me very depressed again, and for the third time in my life, I seriously considered to say goodbye to this life. It should be noted that in these moments of despair, people are able to make drastic changes in their lives, for they have nothing more to lose, and by doing something they'd never imagined doing, they get a chance to find their place in life. And so, in this moment of despair, I decided to learn if auras, about which I read a long time ago, do actually exist. That would be the proof that in this world there is something that is worth living for. That the world is not just the constant race for money and accumulation of material things, which we will abandon sooner or later. The logic was simple. If there were actually people in history who could see auras, that means that anyone can learn to see them, including myself. I'd been learning English for several years, and so I googled how to see auras. The first result was this website, Ealva.com. Reading it, I learned that there's a book called Ealva Prophecy. Having watched the lecture of Michel Desmarquet, the man who had to write the book, I realized that I want to read that book. The author put it on the internet for free. Link in the description. I think that it would be best to first speak about the information which the book has, and then I will say why I know. I want to emphasize that I know, and not believe, that the content of the book cannot be a fake or hoax. Michel Desmarquet was of French origin and lived in Australia in June of 1987. When he was taken to a planet from which almost 2000 years ago came Jesus Christ, in order to enlighten people of that time on the reality of life, spirituality, and love. He had to speak in parables in order to do that. Modern people are more scientifically educated, and so this time people of Ealva shed light on certain important topics by speaking bluntly. Of course, I can't repeat all 167 pages of the book here, so I'll just speak about the most important topics in this video. Let's start. In the beginning there was nothing except darkness and the spirit, also called the superior intelligence. He decided to create material worlds in order to satisfy his spiritual need. That is, he sought spiritual experiences through a material world. The spirit imagined worlds. He imagined how to create them. From the most enormous to the most minuscule. He imagined atoms. When he imagined them, he created in his imagination all that moved and will move, all that lived and will live, all that is motionless or seems to be, every single thing. Once the superior intelligence had an overall view of what he wanted to create, he was able to create, by his exceptional spiritual force, the four forces of the universe. With this, he directed the first and the most gigantic atomic explosion of all time. The scientists call it the Big Bang. Darkness was gone and the universe was creating itself, according to the will of the Spirit, who, being the creator of it, was and always will be in the center of it. Here's the description of the four forces. Atomic force. During billions of years, all the worlds, stars and atoms were formed. It should be said that for the superior intelligence, the past, the present, and the future are all eternally the present. Stars are forming along with their planets, which can have satellites. At certain times, in certain solar systems, some planets cool down. Soil is formed, rocks solidify, oceans are formed, and land masses become continents. Eventually those planets become habitable for certain forms of life. This is the goal of the atomic force. It created atoms, and then, using them, the material world was created. Planets, stars, etc. Ovocosmic force. Ovo means egg in Latin, ovum. As soon as the planets became habitable for life, the superior intelligence conceived the primarily living creatures and many of the primary plants, from which he later derived the subspecies. This force is called ovocosmic because those creatures and plants were created by cosmic rays, which ended up with cosmic eggs. So, the purpose of the second force of the universe is, or was, to create living creatures and plants on planets which become habitable for life. Ovostromic force. Please note that in the name of this force there's also the word ovo. Before the creation of the universe, the spirit imagined experiencing feelings through a special creature. That creature is man. Similarly to the second force, the third force began acting when it was its time. Here's my interpretation of the third force. When animal and plant life more or less developed on the planets, thanks to the third force, the first humans began to emerge on those planets. If the first animals and plants emerged via cosmic eggs, the first humans were conceived in the astronomic eggs. It's logical to assume that those people could not have been infants, but were of more or less mature age. So, the human being appeared in the universe as is, without going through the process of evolution, thanks to which new species of animals and plants are formed. This may sound strange, but there is a reason for it, which will become clear when we speak about the fourth force of the universe. It should be noted that the appearance of people, the color of skin, height, and so on, depend on the environments of planets on which their ancestors had lived during many years. The fourth force of the universe is the most important since it had to bring to fruition all that the spirit had imagined. It concerns spirituality. Spirituality means intellectual development, gaining of spiritual understandings during our lives. There are two types of knowledge, material and spiritual. Material knowledge. This is all that has to do with the material world. Knowledge about who we are, for example, your name or surname, language that you speak, knowledge about your work, or about scientific advancements, etc. Spiritual knowledge. The example of it can be understanding acquired through personal experience that one cannot strive to attain one's goals by making others suffer in the process, or understanding that unconditional help will bring much more profits not only to the giver but to the whole society than giving help at interest. I'd like to note that this is my interpretation of spiritual knowledge. And so humans appeared in the universe, the creatures via whom spiritual intelligence experiences feelings. How does this process happen and what is spiritual growth? In order to receive the spiritual experiences, the superior intelligence inserted an infinitesimal part of itself into the human body. Before going further, it has to be explained that the human body consists of 9 bodies, each of which has its own purpose. Animals are only made of 3 bodies. One of the reasons why I think the spirit decided to create humans right away the way we are, and not evolve us out of animals and then deal with the problem of how to add the rest of the 6 bodies required for a complete human being. Here are the names of those bodies: physical, physiological, fluidic, astral or soul, psychic, astropsychic, psychotypical. The names of the last 2 bodies were never taught to Michelle. Astral body. Astral body, or soul, contains about 4 billion trillion electrons, exactly mirroring the physical shape of the physical body. These electrons have a lifespan of approximately 10 billion trillion of Earth years. They were created at the moment of creation. Each of these electrons has a memory, and each is capable of retaining as much information as is contained in the books that fill the shelves of an average town library. Astral body consists of 1/9 of its higher self, or overself, as it's sometimes called too. Higher self is known for many people as the light at the end of the tunnel. The higher self of man is, in other words, an entity which sends 1/9 of itself into a human body, becoming the person's astral being. So 9 people share the same higher self on a planet of the first category. Further, the higher self is a 9th part of a superior higher self, which, in turn, is a 9th part of a more superior higher self. The initial higher self is of the first category. The 9th category is the last one. The higher selves have several purposes. We are in constant communication with our higher self thanks to the cerebral canal, which acts as a transmitting and receiving host that sends special vibrations between our astral body and higher self. Also, higher self receives all the sensations we experience living in the physical body. These sensations pass through the immense filter of 9 higher selves. What feelings remain arrive in the etheric ocean that surrounds the spirit. If these sensations are based essentially on materialism, the higher selves have enormous trouble filtering them. The filtering is necessary since the spirit only needs to have spiritual feelings. This filtering process can be compared to a 9-stage filter, whose purpose is to filter out 9 elements from the water. Each stage eliminates one element until the water becomes clean. The spiritual growth of the astral body happens thanks to the accumulation of spiritual knowledge. How fast will the necessary amount of knowledge be acquired? This mainly depends on each human being and decisions which he makes in his lives. In time, this process can take from 500 to 15,000 years for people of the first category. Thus, if we take the average lifespan of 50 years, then people have to live a minimum of 10 lives in order to reach the sufficient spiritual growth for reincarnating on a planet of the second category. When the higher self of a human, living for example on Earth, will have nothing left to filter, the soul will be able to detach itself from the higher self of the first category and rejoin the higher self of the second category. It's also possible to skip a category if the person has lived his life in such a way that the higher self of the second category also had nothing to filter. That is, the person learned not only the lessons of his planet, but also the lessons which are being taught on higher planets. There are 9 categories of planets in the universe. Categories correspond to the spiritual category of people who can live on such planets. The higher the category, the easier it is to live on such a planet. For example, people suffer less the higher they advance in their spiritual development. And the suffering ends completely on the planets of the 9th category. People also live longer on the planets of higher categories. And on the planets of the 9th category, people are able to regenerate the cells of their bodies at will, and so they live for as long as they need to. Certain universal laws exist regarding what planets people may choose to live on. If a person of a lower category comes to a planet of a higher spiritual category, he will die after a fixed amount of time if he stays on that planet. For example, a person from a planet of the first category who came to a planet of the 9th category will be able to live on it exactly 9 days, and he will die on the 10th. The soul will reincarnate back on the planet he came from. And if for some reason there's no life on that planet, then on another planet of the same category as his or her astral body. In case when a person of a higher spiritual category comes to a planet of a lower spiritual category, he starts to suffer since his advanced spirituality cannot exist in a materialistic environment. Therefore, a soul that reached the second spiritual category will be reincarnated on a planet of the same category. In rare cases, a soul may choose to be born on a planet of a lower category, if, for example, people who live on that planet are in need of help. One of such examples is Moses, who is said to have suffered from stuttering despite his advanced spirituality, the result of the universal law. Moses' soul was of the 9th category. After completing the cycle of reincarnations on the planet of the 9th category, people are able to reunite with superior intelligence. That will be the end of the life cycle in the material world for that part of the spirit. Perhaps you'd like to know what lessons people have to learn on planets of different categories. People live on the planets of the first category in order to learn how to live, suffer, and die, but also to develop spirituality as much as they can. The last one applies to the planets of all categories. Such life lessons are logical because there are people on the planets of the first category who live their very first life in this universe and don't have any spiritual knowledge. And those who have lived other lives before may have minuscule amount of such knowledge. Due to the lack of spiritual knowledge, people often make mistakes, each of which people have to suffer for. This is another inexorable universal law. The punishment can come right away, in a month, or in another life, but absolutely all errors must be paid for. This universal law is necessary, otherwise there would be no justice in life. This way, even if a killer dies never been caught, he will still have to pay for his actions in his other life. We can compare this law to cause and effect. All actions have consequences. The right actions bring happiness, and the wrong actions bring suffering. People living on planets of other categories also have their own lessons, which they have to learn by means of acquiring life experiences. For example, people living on the planets of the ninth category, having complete material and spiritual knowledge, are able to assist, guide, and sometimes punish the inhabitants of lower spiritual category planets under their guardianship. You shouldn't be afraid of the word punish, unless of course you're an evil dictator who's exterminating his people or someone like that. An example of such punishment could be Sodom and Gomorrah. The people of those two towns were presenting a bad example and acting dangerously for the people in contact with them. The people from Ilaoba tried various means in an endeavor to put them back on the right track, but in vain. There are at least 2 instances in the Earth's history when Ilaobans helped the people living here, but maybe we'll talk about them in another video. The process of reincarnation. Another question should be answered: how does reincarnation happen and why we don't remember our previous lives, if we did have any? When the physical body of a human dies, 19% of the electrons of the astral body rejoin the electrons of the universe until required by nature to form a new body or a new tree or animal. The 81% of the soul flies down a psychic canal at the end of which there is a bright light. Upon reaching the light, the person will feel the state of bliss, happiness. That light is the person's higher self, whom he is rejoined. It should be said that in certain cases, when, for example, an accident happens, the person, having not yet reached the light, can ask his higher self to send him back into his physical body. Sometimes his wish will be permitted, but only if the person wants to go back for the sake of people who need him, and not for his own sake. And so the astral body has rejoined with its higher self and awaits reincarnation. Sooner or later, the soul will be offered a new life. The person previews his possible future life, which has been shown by his higher self. All the events are shown which the person might be able to experience in his potential body. He can agree or reject to live the offered life. In both cases, the astral body has to pass through the river of oblivion, which erases all material knowledge, leaving only spiritual knowledge. If the person has chosen to be born, the higher self sends the soul into the physical body, and the person starts living. Remember about the law of the universe, that it's necessary to pay for all the errors. When the soul is with its higher self, the person knows about the real purpose of the universe and its laws. So it shouldn't be surprising that people choose to live in bodies which are destined to suffer. By living in the material world, we can actually feel those events which had been thought of by the superior intelligence before the creation of the universe, in his/her imagination. You probably know that it's possible to create the whole worlds in imagination, or be simply playing on a musical instrument and hear in one's mind all the notes, but we can only actually feel those notes in the material world. At least that's my opinion, which I have right now based on my knowledge. I also want to say about the capabilities of a higher self of the first category, which constantly monitors a person during his life and knows everything that is happening to him or near him. We know one of the capabilities, resuscitating the dead, but we were talking about the so-called clinical death. As far as I know, it's also possible to resurrect a person who died by an accident, for example, in 3 days after his death. If a living person via his own higher self will ask the higher self of the dead person to resurrect him. I think Jesus resurrected people the same way. Also, a higher self of the first category is able to cure illness, if there are reasons for doing that. In my past video I talked about me being instantly cured. That was my higher self who cured me. A higher self can also save a person from an accident, if it is not yet time for the person to die. For example, when a person can't catch a plane due to various reasons, and then the plane crashes. Or when a feeble old woman crosses the road not seeing a fast-moving car and, suddenly, finds in herself the strength required to jump back as if she's 20 years old. Her higher self triggered a reaction in her adrenaline glands, which, for a few seconds, provided enough strength to her muscles to enable her to execute the leap which saved her life. Also, a higher self can, during sleep, call the astral body to itself. The purpose may be to communicate instructions or ideas, or regeneration of the soul, replenishing of its spiritual strengths. In addition, a higher self can enlighten us in regards to solutions to important problems which we might have in life. So, it's important to have undisturbed sleep, without any noise or nightmares occurring because of harmful impressions received during the day. The saying "the night brings counsel" has to do with the truth about which I just talked. Several other important universal laws should be mentioned. Each creature in the universe, human and otherwise, has complete freedom of choice. Even the spirit doesn't oblige a single creature to do anything. So, dictatorship is one of the gravest mistakes of our planet. Another law of the universe is the reason why people from Eoba and other spiritually advanced planets can't help us directly. The universal law prohibits them to serve the meal on a plate for most of the time, since it is our goal to learn on our own experience. For example, it's possible to do the homework for the child and he will learn nothing, which will lead to him needing to repeat his education. Or we can help him understand the concept of the subject and let him finish his homework using the newly acquired knowledge and understanding. Only in rare moments can Eobians give us a helping hand. Jesus Christ is one example, and the initialization of the writing of the book we're talking about is another. The universal law decrees that man's principal obligation, regardless of which planet he happens to inhabit, is to develop his spirituality. The universal law prohibits suicide. In the end, I want to tell that there are two things capable of damaging our soul. The first one is hallucinogenic drugs, which remove the astral body in a sphere where it shouldn't be. When drugged, an individual's astral body is so asleep, experiencing artificial sensations that completely distort his or her judgment. The astral body gets saturated with false data. Recovery for the astral body can take several lifetimes. Thus, drugs should be avoided at all costs. The other thing capable of damaging our soul is the vibrations occasioned by certain kinds of noise. This is very serious, since such noise actually damages the astral body. Eobians use discotheques as the example for the very harmful noise people subject themselves to. Remember that the events mentioned in the book took place in 1987. My rough estimates show that we should stay away from anything that creates a noise of 85 decibels or higher. Unfortunately, nothing was said about whether the healing of the damaged electrons is possible or not. I want to believe that the answer is yes. My spiritual experience. Why I know that the information contained in this book is true. When I was reading Eoba Prophecy, I had a strong feeling that what I was reading was the truth. Of course, it is not the reason why I say I know that the book is completely truthful. Hearing those realizations, I want to experience on my own experience such things as seeing of the aura, seeing of the etheric field, and I also wanted to try and learn to move at least very wide objects by means of telekinesis. I did reach some success in all of the aforementioned spheres. I'll try to talk about those little known subjects in another videos. I'll just say that meditation and concentration can help you in learning to see auras, just as it can help in telekinesis. Both require the ability to concentrate and be focused. Perhaps the easiest thing each of you can prove to yourselves is the existence of higher selves. If you watched my previous video about my spiritual experiences, then perhaps you remember that when I was still in school, I wished to be awakened at 5 o'clock in the morning, because the alarm clock was not working, and I was actually as if woken up by someone at exactly 5 a.m. After reading Eoba Prophecy, I realized that back then I was awoken by my higher self, because it constantly monitors us and, therefore, knows not only everything that is happening to us, but also all that we're thinking. I decided to ask my higher self to wake me up at a certain time early in the morning, and each time I was awakened in the exact time I asked for. I also often had a feeling that I was actually awoken by someone, that I didn't just wake up by myself. So, if you don't know where to start proving to yourself the truthfulness of Eoba Prophecy, I'd suggest to start with your higher self by following my experience. I also had a small experience when I felt spinning chakras, but I've never had a chance to study the subject in full, so I can merely confirm the real existence of chakras, and that when they are spinning you can actually experience the sensation of a fluid, hence the name of the body which contains in itself 6 major chakras, fluidic body. All of my aforementioned life experiences show that the person who was entrusted to write the book, Eoba Prophecy, had to at least know about the existence of all those things about which he writes in the book. But the ultimate indication of the truthfulness of the book for me is the next series of events which happened after I had read the book and learned on my own experience about the existence of such things as auras. The first event happened when I was lying in bed watching tennis on TV. At one moment I looked away from the screen, and I clearly remember how I heard in my right ear, "Look." When I looked at the screen, it was showing in close-up shot the scoreboard, on which there was the number 33. I need to explain several moments here. First, Tao, Michel's mentor during his journey to Ilauba, told him that they have 333 days in their year. She also told him that their day contains 26 curses, hours. A curse is a period of 55 hours, minutes, and a word contains 70 casios. A casio is almost equivalent to our second. You can pause and calculate the sum yourself if you want. I will tell you that the result is equal to 33,333,300 casios. Perhaps you've heard of the Holy Fire, and that it said not to burn skin for 33 minutes. If you read the book, you'll see the connection between the Holy Fire and Eogans. In short, the number 3 has both universal and spiritual meaning. I've had many other instances when I felt as if being drawn to look at something, and sure enough, I saw the number 33 there. In numerology, the number 33 has to do with spirituality. Another moment has to do with Tao saying the word "look" several times to Michel during his voyage to Ilauba. So I immediately realized that it was Tao at that moment. And no, the possibility that what I heard was something else doesn't exist. Not only the sound distinctly occurred close to my right ear, it was the first and only time I've ever experienced hearing something with my own ears in several centimeters from me, and yet there was nobody there. The windows were closed. I live in Moscow, Russia. At one time I was trying to see auras, and in order to do that I was experimenting by concentrating on my pineal gland, and also the front part of the brain. All of a sudden, out of my front part of the brain came out a stream of thoughts. I don't remember their contents. After several days, when I was in bed ready to sleep, I received the same stream of thoughts, but this time it was coming into my brain, and not out of it. The contents of the thoughts were as follows: "We can't help you," or "We won't help you." I don't know for sure if it was can't or won't, since in the thought form these both thoughts are quite similar. They both indicate a negative. It was clear that this telepathic message could only have come from Eogans. I have never experienced the same type of telepathy. I should say that they did actually help me after all. Then, in the course of following years, I used to have several cases when I would get telepathic messages from Eogans, mainly from Tao. They were all of a personal nature, aimed to help me understand how to live so that I could get out of depression which had lasted for years. I think that the horrible psychological and physical state in which I got myself into by making several mistakes in my life is one of the main reasons why they helped me. Of course, in conjunction with the fact that I genuinely tried to develop psychic abilities and also try to understand how to live the right way. The telepathy itself was in the form of a voice in the head. I've never experienced anything like that before reading the book. There's also no chance that it was something else. All the telepathic messages had specific meaning. One of the telepathic messages came to me when I was beating myself up about the wrong choices I had made some time ago, and which almost destroyed my whole life. Shortly speaking, it was about a girl who had some serious problems in life. I fell in love with her and wanted to help her, but due to various reasons I couldn't tell her about my feelings, nor did I help her. Had I done the right thing back then, perhaps I would not have lost my health, and also, even if I didn't have a girlfriend, at least I would have tried to have some love experience instead of running away from it, which would benefit my psychological state. So in the telepathic message itself, it was said that in that case, I would not have had any communication with Eogans. Something I was glad I got to experience in my life. Thanks to that message, I was able to find peace of mind again in my life. I realized that even so I didn't have what I wanted to. In return, I got a very important experience and knowledge. Another telepathic message said the following: "There are other joys in life." It was referring to sex. I was pretty torn up about not having love and sex in my life for a very long time. After the telepathic message, I got a bit better, and now I don't worry much about not having a girlfriend. The message itself came from Tao, since she used the words "other joys" when she was talking to Michel about Arki's death, and the fact that he would be reincarnated and probably would have other joys in life. Also, I used to have many moments when upon waking up I saw Tao's face in front of my closed eyes. Usually it meant, in my opinion, that I should remember the dream which I had that night. And one time South's face appeared in front of my eyes in the middle of the day. Back then I wanted to create a web store with web applications. But after that moment with Tao, I realized that it is not what I wanted to do in my life. When I say in front of my eyes, I mean that her face was as if imposed onto my retina, if that makes sense. In reality, there of course was no physical face made of atoms in front of me. Then there was one time when I woke up in the middle of the night and saw on the wall near my bed two human shadows. They were moving from right to left. I've never seen anything like that before or after that night. I live on the second floor. The nearest street light is 90 meters from my apartment building. It illuminates the tramway tracks. The lamp therefore is several meters above the ground. And even if pedestrians could somehow fly between the lamp and my window, then the shadows produced on the wall still wouldn't be that clear. The only way they could be as clear as they were is if someone passed in the immediate vicinity from the wall. I've had several other interactions with AI guns, but if I talk about all of them, then it's going to be a very long video. Maybe some other time. So the experiences I've had allow me to be completely certain that the events about which Michel Desmarquet reports in the book Eoba Prophecy actually happened in June of 1987. The information contained in the book is very important to human spiritual and intellectual growth. Having had the aforementioned experiences, I decided that it would be a mistake not to try and tell about it to other people via the internet. I will remind you again that after the internet became widespread on Earth, the online version of the book was published for free on the web of Michel Desmarquet's own accord. You can download it by following this link. Thanks for watching.